conservative, constitutional. It's the Andrew Cooperrider Show, keeping you informed on what's going on right here in Kentucky.
And welcome, everybody, to another amazing day right here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider, and today we've got an amazing week for you. A lot of things happening. The legislature's really on the move. A lot of big stories even coming out Friday that we'll be digging into. We'll really be focusing on the floor debate in the House over Senate Bill 6. Senate Bill 6 deals with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives in our post-secondary public universities, colleges, and universities. It doesn't do anything with K through 12, unfortunately, but it does look at the DEI initiatives there, so we'll be digging into that. Also, House Bill 2, the constitutional amendment to allow school choice here in Kentucky, has passed the Senate. We'll talk a little bit about that. But first, before we get into it, make sure you head on over to theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. This is the video episode of the week, but if you want to listen to the audio version, you got to listen either on WZXI at 9 a.m., Monday through Friday, or you can head on over to theandrewshow.com and see where you can listen to the podcast. Comes out at 1 p.m. Monday through Friday. The Andrew Cooper Show is Kentucky's only conservative podcast that focuses specifically on Kentucky issues that comes out every single day, Monday through Friday. Only daily show out there. So we're certainly bringing you the kind of news nobody else is. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider. Before I dig into my main stories, though, I do want to talk about two votes that kind of took place on Friday. Two things to talk about. First, Senate Bill 143 will be the Second Amendment, it looks like, to be added onto our ballot. What that would do would be an amendment to stop non-citizens. It would put it into the Kentucky Constitution that non-U.S. citizens are not allowed to vote in Kentucky elections, whether that's local or national. Now, it's already, of course, against the Constitution and against federal law for non-citizens to vote in federal elections. But obviously, in your local elections, like we see in some other states like California, such as your city councils, police, not police, sheriffs, city councils, fiscal courts, those types of elections, school boards. We've seen state elections that the state has control over, governorship, for an example, them turning those elections and allowing non-U.S. citizens to vote. So kind of heading this off at a pass to fight something that we're already seeing in other states was this constitutional amendment. Funny enough, though, 13 Democrats voted no on the bill, voted no putting the measure onto the ballot. You think it'd be something we should all agree on, only U.S. citizens should be allowed to vote. But for some reason, 13 Democrats decided that wasn't the case. They decided they just hate America. They want to allow anybody to vote regardless of their ties to America, regardless of being naturalized citizens, regardless of whether or not they value our Constitution the way we do. They decided, hey, well, you know what? I don't think I want to see that on the ballot. Now, there's a political reason for it to be on the ballot as well. One of the difficult things when it comes to some of these constitutional amendments, getting it done for the conservatives, especially during a presidential election year, will be getting them to move past the straight ticket vote. A lot of times, a lot of the people that will show up to vote in 2024 will either A, vote for just Donald Trump and move on, but what a lot of them will do, and I think the vast majority of them will do, that are Republican, will just go ahead and vote straight ticket. They'll bubble in that straight ticket. They'll walk out and think that they voted in everything. But when it comes to your nonpartisan elections, such as your school boards, as well as these constitutional amendments, by voting straight ticket, you don't cast a ballot, you don't cast a vote in those elections. And so by having something that's a little bit more, I don't want to say politically charged, but a little more of a political thing to get people to move down to the constitutional amendments, to get those conservatives showing up to vote for Donald Trump, to go ahead and move down to the constitutional amendments and potentially not just vote yes, because there's a sales thing too here, but get them to vote yes on an amendment, get them to move there with this citizenship voting question, with non-U.S. citizens not being allowed to vote, putting that into our state constitution. So that gets them to the ballot, but then also by getting them to vote yes, it puts them in a predisposition to go ahead and vote yes on the rest of the constitutional amendments, which one will include school choice. It appears there might be a third one, an ability for the legislature to call itself back into session. We'll be tracking that to as well. And so the reasoning, and so, they even asked this, the Democrats asked this and said, do we have a single document in case of this happening? And it's like, no, we don't have it yet in Kentucky, but of course it is an issue in other states. And it's kind of one of those things too, where if you think it's even slightly possible, you need to deal with it now, because if you deal with it after non-U.S. citizens are already able to vote in the elections, well, now you'll be putting forward a constitutional amendment that non-U.S. citizens would get to vote on in order to vote on whether or not they get to vote. And so it could be something that's really hard to undo once it starts going. So this is definitely something where the argument to being proactive is so big, because if you're not, you could never get it done post if you have all these non-U.S. citizens voting in our elections. Another piece of legislation kind of working its way through, it's been put into the revenue bill. As that tells you it'll pretty much pass. The revenue bill, of course, is where it outlines how the state raises revenues, outlines, taxation policies, sales and use tax, so on and so forth. A lot of it has stayed much the same over the prior years, which once again makes you wonder where we're getting $20 billion more in spending from, because obviously, for those of you who listened to last week's show, you know that the Senate passed their version of the budget, added $2 more billion in spending. So now it's $22 billion more dollars than we've ever spent before in the history of Kentucky. Almost a 50% increase in spending over the highest year we've had prior to this. And so looking at that spending, wondering where are we getting that money from without major changes to the revenue bill certainly leads to some questions. But the revenue bill authorizes all the different taxation policies. Now, one thing that's in the revenue bill this year, which is pretty great, is it will be removing sales tax on precious metals. This includes gold and silver. I believe it's titanium too as well. And so, things like if you buy gold bullion or of course silver as a hedge against inflation, remember, y'all, typically speaking, those are not investments. Those are hedges against inflation. Investments, you want to get a return on your money greater than inflation. If you're buying gold or silver, typically that you're just saying, I just want my money to keep up with inflation, a reason to kind of hold on to it if you don't trust, quote unquote, banks and savings accounts, or even now where inflation is surpassing, if it's surpassing your average savings accounts yield percentage, which it is. I mean, if you're doing 2 or 3% yield on your average savings account, that's not keeping up with inflation. So you're going to want to go out and buy that in gold to keep your savings up with inflation. That is something people do. I'm not giving you investment advice. I'm just saying that is something people do. And so by taking away this sales tax on precious metals, it wasn't really like you're collecting the sales tax in the first place, because obviously if you're somebody who's setting out there to buy gold, you're buying 10,000, 20,000 at a time. A lot of times silver, same situation. You're probably not buying small quantities. And so, on $10,000 worth of gold, you were paying, $600 in sales tax. You would just drive out of state, go buy your gold in a non-gold tax state. I believe Ohio is a non-sales tax state on precious metals. And so you'd go ahead and purchase there and then come back to Kentucky. So Kentucky wasn't really collecting this sales tax on gold and precious metals in the first place. But assuming this will pass, we now will see that your precious metal purchases won't be hit with that 6% sales tax. Quite a savings. Also opens up some opportunities for these companies that create these gold backs, an alternative kind of currency kind of thing, to open up in Kentucky. That's one thing that they had as a requirement in order for them to offer a Kentucky gold back, was to have no sales tax on gold. And so if we achieve it here, which it looks like we will, you will now see the possibility for a Kentucky gold back to come into Kentucky. And for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, just Google New Hampshire gold backs and you'll see what I'm talking about. Well, we'll be coming back with our discussion on Senate Bill 6, as well as a little bit on House Bill 2 after this short break. You're listening to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. Listen up, my fellow business owners. You need to get your cybersecurity and IT support under control. Reach out to the folks at Amston today. Call 859-300-0087 or visit amston.com. It is no secret that cyber attacks have become a constant threat, and you need to make sure that your organization is protected. Amston has over 30 years of experience working with businesses and governments alike. Call 859-300-0087 or visit visit AmstonAMPSTUN.com today. And you are back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider. So on Friday, we had the Senate pass House Bill 2. House Bill 2, of course, will put that constitutional amendment directly on the ballot for ratification by the citizens of Kentucky this November. So simply put, a simple majority of Kentuckians must vote yes to put this amendment into the Constitution, and it would allow school choice to come into effect. Priorly, our state Supreme Court has ruled that according to our current constitution, state constitution, according to their interpretation of it, that school choice, that any kind of school choice, whether that's generally charters or, voucher systems, public, pseudo-private schools, whatever it may be, were not allowed. Neither were educational savings accounts or any number of other types of legislation that enables a little bit more parental control over a student's education. And so I mentioned this last week after, as it was going through, so it's passed, so it should be put onto the ballot, assuming though, of course, the Supreme Court doesn't strike it from the ballot, because there could be a challenge on it. And the challenge would be on it being, quote unquote, too vague. There's been a prior Supreme Court ruling that says that if citizens can't clearly understand what they're voting on when it comes to a constitutional amendment, then the constitutional amendment should not be allowed on the ballot. And so the constitutional amendment in this case reads as follows: to give parents choice in educational opportunities for their children, are you in favor of enabling the General Assembly to provide financial support for the costs of students in kindergarten through 12th grade who are outside of the common public, they put that in quotation, schools, by amending the Constitution of Kentucky as stated below. It is proposed that a new section be added to the Constitution of Kentucky to read as follows: the General Assembly may provide financial support for the education of students outside the system of common schools. The General Assembly may exercise this authority by law, sections 59, 60, 171, 183, 184, 186, and 189 of this Constitution notwithstanding. Now, priorly, the fact that it only said common schools would have been a case for challengement, saying that the average citizen doesn't understand what common schools are. They added the public in parentheses, common parentheses, public schools. I think that's one key way that they can make sure this doesn't get challenged in the Supreme Court, or at least is upheld, because the average citizen will now understand what the word common schools actually means, that they're talking about our public school systems as it's accepted. But you could still be the challenge that gets it knocked off the ballot, being that the average citizen has no clues what section 59, 60, 171, 183, 184, 186, and 189 of the Constitution even say. And for those of you who are curious, section 59 of the Constitution deals with local and special legislation, and section 60 deals with general law not to be made special or local by amendment. So what they're saying there, that piece of legislation allowing 59 and 60 to be notwithstanding, meaning to be ignored when they're making this type of laws about school choice, means that they could do it regionally and by area. See, our Constitution currently makes it to where the legislature cannot pass a law that would specifically target a specific place and rule on very local specific issues that, generally speaking, the law needs to be dealt with on a state level. You can't ask the legislature to pass a law saying that one specific school district has to do XYZ while the rest of the school districts don't. That wouldn't be qualified. Now, you could say something along the lines of, all school districts must do XYZ, and then they need to follow. For an example, looking at, quote unquote, breaking up the Jefferson County public school system, you could see them, it'd be very difficult for them to craft a law that's constitutional that could literally come in and specifically kind of break that up per se by name, but they could definitely do some different pieces of legislation there. You can't pass a law saying it's only illegal to steal in Louisville. You can't do that. So 59 and 60 deal with that, and being able to ignore that for the purpose of making educational law. 171, when it deals with taxes being levied, there's a rider in there that says taxes levied can't be used for non-public institutions. So it kind of gets over a potential ruling. You could argue that you wouldn't need to change that part of our Constitution if we didn't have a Supreme Court that was doing everything they could in order to make sure school choice doesn't pass in Kentucky. But you got to throw it in there to be safe. And then 183, 184, 186 and 189 are all sections that deal with specifically our quote-unquote common schools, our public schools. And so those individual laws or constitutional writings within there need to be not withstood, so need to be kind of ignored in order to make a school choice work. And so, that's going to be put onto the ballot for people to consider. But I think this will offer some pretty interesting, particularly potentially electoral outcomes in 2024, because I think Republicans may pick up a few seats in the House, which flies in face of all that Democrat hopefulness. When they looked at Beshear's election, they said, oh, well, there's 20 House seats in Beshear's election that we could pick up, that Beshear won. So if we could just repeat that, we'll pick them up. But of course, we always knew that was a pie in the sky dream that isn't accurate or true, because you're not Beshear, you're not an incumbent, and literally you're not Beshear. Beshear's a one-off, and Democrats need to come to grips with that if they want to move forward. They can't look at anything Beshear's done as an opportunity for them to open up a winning platform, because Beshear comes from the fact that the majority of Kentuckians at some point have voted for the last name Beshear when Beshear was running for re-election, whether it was 4 years ago, whether it was for his dad twice, whenever they voted for Beshear's, that's a name they feel comfortable with. And that's kind of how Kentuckians a lot of times vote. If they see a name they feel comfortable with, they'll keep voting for them, which is why, like an incumbent Democrat could hold on to a House seat for a long time. And then the moment that incumbent Democrat leaves, it gets replaced with a Republican taking over the seat, because, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't. And, they kind of know that Democrat and how they vote already. But if it's just generic DNR and they know nothing about them, the majority of Kentuckians are voting for a Republican. And so you're going to see this coming into this election, that with Trump on the ballot, you're going to see obviously high conservative turnout. You're going to see, Trump wins Kentucky by 60, 70%, something crazy. 80%, whatever. He's going to win it by a lot. And so that will drive the vote. But I also think you're going to see something interesting when it comes to school choice. School choice in general garners quite a lot of support, as in, according to polls in Kentucky by Mason-Dixon in 2019, that was before COVID, before JCPS, Jefferson County Public Schools, had their debacle with busing and transportation, before we've had all this learning loss, before we've seen literally a dumpster fire of a school system that JCPS is continue to burn. Before all that, it was still enjoyed 72% of support by Kentuckians. And this is why I think you'll see some electoral interesting outcomes, because Republican representatives really, they'll disagree with school choice for two reasons. There's really only two reasons. One is they are representing their constituents, and their constituents actually feel uncomfortable with the idea of school choice. You'll see this out in our rural part of Kentucky, where they don't have as many private schools. Of course, they're ignoring the fact that when you put in, school choice system, you will start to see more private school options start to open up and become more attainable to everyday Kentuckians. But anyways, so they don't see those private schools, so it's not as much something they can grasp onto. The public school systems are the largest employer in the area. And so you could see, especially the Eastern Kentucky reps and senators, we saw Senator Wheeler vote no on it, Fugate vote no on it in the House. You could see them doing that because they're actually representing their constituents in their vote. However, when you have Republican representatives like Timoney and Michael Meredith voting no against it in the House, it's for really only one reason. They are in league with the teachers' unions and the school administrators as a system, as a lobbying group, and they're being funneled cash and money and everything else to them, and they believe in representing that special interest more than representing their actual constituents. And so I think, one, they're having some pretty big primary challengers, both Simony and Meredith. They should have just voted yes on the constitutional amendment to take a lot of heat off of them, but they didn't, and they're going to have issues because they didn't. But anyways, so, that's because they're in hock to the unions. But when you look at the Democrats, on the other hand, it's a completely different story. All of them say no to it. And it's only for one reason, because they are at the service of the administrators and the teachers unions that are running our K through 12 educational system into the ground. It's not the teachers, it's the unions and these administrators, and they're just running it into the ground, and the Democrats are completely at service to them. It's got nothing to do with constituents, because if they bothered to lobby and ask their constituents, they know that a lot of them support school choice. It will be a massive ad campaign to try to get this amendment to not move forward. They're going to try to lie. They're going to say a whole lot of things that aren't true, and they're going to be backed in a corner and forced to do it. It's why the Democrats fought so hard about this coming to the ballot in the first place, because they know if it comes to the ballot, there's a better than good chance that it might actually pass. And that leaves some questions, because if it does pretty well in some of these liberal areas, it leaves some questions about the Democrats in those areas and being potentially at some risk of losing, because they're going to come out hard against this amendment, even though their constituents maybe will greatly be for it, and it might become quite the liability for them. So I think that'll be interesting to watch, certainly. Well, coming up after this, we're going to be digging into Senate Bill 6, deals with DEI in colleges and universities. It's a big debate took place on Friday. We'll be showing you some clips from that, giving you a little commentary on the floor debate. You'll have all that and more here on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider. We'll see you in a few short minutes.
Lexington Overstock Warehouse is Central Kentucky's best source for stylish new home furnishings. Don't pay retail. With our low overhead operating structure and big name brands, we offer the absolute best values on new furniture for every room. Shop online anytime at LexingtonOverstockWarehouse.com or visit our weekends only showroom located at 156 West Tiverton Way. Right now, for listeners of this show, we're offering a special discount for our online customers. Use coupon code FREEDOM for an additional 10% off your online order today. Lexington Overstock Warehouse, low overhead equals really low prices.
And you are back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. Of course, I'm your host, Andrew Cooperrider. So Senate Bill 6 came to the floor, passed forward out of the House this past Friday. What is Senate Bill 6? Well, Senate Bill 6 used to ban the teaching of DEI in public universities. So like UK, UVL, KCTC, Kentucky Community Technical Colleges, EKU, the state universities, public universities. So it banned the teaching of DEI on those campuses and the DEI initiatives. And it passed out of the Senate, came over to the House. The House has made a lot of changes to it, basically swapped the entire bill for a different bill. Now, Jennifer Decker's the carrier in the House, and what she swapped it for is essentially her bill on DEI that she had in the House, or large parts of it, in order to get something passed. So kind of pulled a little bit of a switcheroo. So Senate Bill 6, I would say, honestly, doesn't actually go as far as with the committee sub that Decker has put in place than Senate Bill 6 did before. That much is quite clear. It's a much softer bill, I think. But even with it being so soft, the Democrats in our legislature had huge problems with it. And so, sorry, a little cough in the throat. So what's the goal with this Senate Bill 6 coming out of the committee? What's it trying to do here? Well, it's trying to get rid of the DEI offices and colleges and universities specifically, because that deals with things like admissions, scholarships, housing, so on and so forth. Basically saying you cannot discriminate against students based upon their skin color, their gender, their race, religion, and you can't deny them entry. You can't provide special whatever. You can't house them differently unless it's by gender, of course. You can't, you can't give them scholarships based upon solely those characteristics, basically stating that any kind of racism, judging people based upon your skin color, sexism, judging people based upon somebody's gender, or some sort of gender, whatever, LGBTQ, basically straight discrimination, I guess you'd call it. Straight discrimination. basically saying that colleges can't continue to do these things. It's unconstitutional. It's wrong. It's racist. It's awful. And that's what DEI is in real life. You hear it and you think, well, it's great. It's just trying to increase diversity and equity and get more people onto campus from all kinds of different lifestyles. But in practice, what it ends up doing is saying that we're going to hire companies, even that's banned also in this. We're going to hire companies. We're going to recruit people. We're going to offer scholarships and financial aid and all these things based upon people's immutable characteristics. And that's racism just by a different name. And here was the bill's carrier, Jennifer Decker, introducing the bill. Here's what she had to say on the floor as she was kind of talking about why this bill is necessary and why it's a problem.
While the Council on Post-Secondary Education first required adherence to a statewide diversity plan in 2011, the idea was that embracing DEI policies would benefit Kentucky's low-income and historically underrepresented minorities. Just yesterday, however, the Attorney General of Kentucky decided that by defining underrepresented minorities exclusively in terms of race, our state's diversity plans violate the United States Constitution and the Civil Rights Act. CPE's data proves that since 2011, the enrollment of low-income in-state students on our campuses has dropped by nearly 34%, and the enrollment of low-income in-state Black students has plummeted by nearly 42%.
So not only are these DEI offices like clearly racist, but it's also not even achieving the goal that the racism was supposed to do. The entire point of kicking out white straight males was to get more Black, female, whatever students as a whole number enrolled into colleges and universities. While they're making up greater percentages, the actual raw numbers of the amount going into the universities and colleges has gone down. There's less people from minority groups in Kentucky being enrolled. There's less underrepresented people going to college. There's also just a lot less straight white males too. And it's just point that the original goal of racism has done nothing but hurt the universities overall in all categories. It hasn't helped anybody. So what does the bill actually do when we look at it? So on top of making sure you can't discriminate based upon housing opportunities, race, scholarships, admissions, basically you got to treat each individual the same regardless of their skin color because, well, DEI wasn't doing that. They also are not required to take DEI trainings or classes. Students, faculty, college staff, they cannot be required under this bill, assuming it passes fully, to require DEI trainings or classes. They can't require a student to take a course that teaches discriminatory concepts, and to kind of, we'll kind of return to what that means, discriminatory concepts, in a bit. Now, as I said, though, this bill doesn't go as far as the original Senate Bill 6 that banned teaching of it completely. Now it just says that DEI cannot be mandatory. And it tightens down, the bill also tightens down the ability to make claims of bias incidences. So shutting down kind of these witch hunts from racism to a large degree, which we see mainly, of course, with teachers, teachers having claims against them made by students that they're racist simply because they're not doing well in their classes. But it also asks the universities to bring out, to put forth some viewpoint diversity, which is a big problem with many of these DEI initiatives. Diversity of skin color shouldn't be a goal of any institution. It doesn't make any sense. Any learned institution, any company trying to get the best ideas, viewpoint diversity. Now that would be something you could go after that could actually help the overall success of an organization. For an example, what do you think would come out with a greater diversity of ideas? Okay, so let's say you're dealing with something like drug addiction. Okay, and you've got two rooms. A room where there's 3 white straight guys, but one's from an upper class family, one's from rural Kentucky, and one's from a family that lived primarily off welfare and within the city. Okay, so you got a room full of those 3 white straight guys, but from those backgrounds. Or a room that's got 1 black guy, 1 Indian woman, and 1 trans person, whatever. And they all came from upper class families in the city. Who do you think is going to come closer to getting a real comprehensive solution to addiction, or at least some ideas that could get us moving in the right direction? Probably the 3 white guys in the room, not because of their skin color, but because they actually have different life experiences than the other 3 that, yeah, they may look different and identify differently, but their life experiences were very much the same way. And I think that's important for you to understand exactly what DEI is, exactly understand how you get diversity of ideas, and understand too exactly what the bill is saying. It's simply telling colleges and universities you can't be racist. Because we're going to listen to what some of these Democrats said on the floor, and they lost their ever-loving minds based upon a bill saying you're not allowed to be racist to people. Absolutely lost their minds on the floor. It really points to what the real big problem and issue is that's going on in our colleges and universities and why they're becoming such liberal cesspools. And these DEI initiatives is a big part of that. We'll be hearing what these people had to say because it gets a little crazy, a little wild. After this short break, you listen to the Andrew Cooperrider Show, your source for Kentucky politics. You want to reach out to the show, head on over to theandrewshow.com. Once again, that's theandrewshow.com. We'll be back here in a few short minutes. 859 Print has local service and low prices. I personally have done tons of business with them. And I can tell you, whether it is getting things printed off, sending direct mail, making business cards, buying TV ad time, digital marketing, they can do it all. And as a special for listeners of this show, they're offering 10% off any and all print services using code RIDER2024. That is code RIDER 2024 for 10% off. Check out 859 Print. You'll be glad you did. And you're back with the Andrew Cooperrider Show. We've been digging into Senate Bill 6 that passed out of the Kentucky State House. Senate Bill 6 deals with DEI initiatives in schools, basically just simply saying that universities can no longer hire, offer scholarships, admissions, people and students based upon things like their skin color. You can't judge them based upon their skin color. You know, you have to treat all applicants the same regardless of their skin hue, regardless of their gender, regardless of their sexual identity, that you couldn't teach without discussion ideas of the DEI ideas, basically that all white people are just awful, and you can't mandate DEI initiatives and trainings within the schools, whether it's to students or faculty, in order to take part. Basic stuff, just simply saying don't be racist. Well, Democrats couldn't handle this. They couldn't handle it at all. And so first we're going to start off with Al Gentry. And he starts us off with what I call the dumb racist Democrat arguments against this bill, because a lot of them are dumb and racist. But anyways, here you go. Here's Al Gentry's comments on the bill.
I know in the bill, right after a definition is given, or produced or made up, what diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives are, we talk about exclusions and we list 5 federal landmark pieces of legislation. There were actually very good examples of what happens when you have diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives.
So starting us off, Al Gentry claims, and his argument against the bill, that the Civil Rights Act, American Disabilities Act, Title IX, etc., are DEI initiatives. But what he fails to understand is, at their very core, they are the exact opposite of DEI initiatives. And the way you kind of know that is by knowing the key hallmark of what these diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives are, and that is to offer something to someone based upon race, gender, sexuality, etc., to offer them a scholarship, offer them a spot at the school, offer them a job, offer them a contract, offer them lower standards, offer them an easier passing grade. But that's not what things like the Civil Rights Acts were about. They're the exact opposite of DEI initiatives. They were about not excluding someone based upon race, gender, or disability. And see, that's a real difference here between racism and discrimination or anti-discrimination. Discrimination is to not offer anyone the same opportunities as everyone else. Racism and DEI, what they're doing within that is to only offer people opportunities based upon their skin color. And I think that's a very key point, to say we're not excluding people based upon gender, skin color, religion, disability. That's great, but that's not what DEI does. It seeks to exclude people and only include certain people based upon things like race, gender, sexuality, so on and so forth. And understanding that is key to understanding why DEI concepts are just so entirely evil. So entirely evil. But at least Al Gentry made somewhat of a, argument that, while misguided, is maybe based in reality. When we hear these next people, quite frankly, they have cooked up their own reality. Next, we're going to hear from Tina Bojanowski and what she has to say about why Senate Bill 6 is no good, very bad, awful, horrible bill.
In closing, this legislation will have a chilling effect on administration's efforts to address rampant mistreatment of minorities, women, LGBTQ students, and faculty on campus. Yet the first line of defense, which is proactive efforts against discrimination and in support of our students, would not exist.
So Tina wants you to believe that there's rampant racism, sexism, and attacks on LGBTQ people on college campuses. That's rampant. It's out of control. It's so rampant and out of control that we need to be proactive with DEI initiatives. We need to attack those who might do those things, but really haven't done those things before they even occur, kind of like a precog thing. We have to be proactive, because without it, these are going to turn into just cesspools of racism and attacks on women and gay people. It's just going to be awful. It's going to have you seen Mad Max Fury Road? It's going to be like that. There's going to be tumbleweeds everywhere, sand everywhere. If you're not a straight white male, you're done for. You're out of there. That's what she claims. So outside the chance that you shouldn't ever pretend to be proactive on punishing people by saying we're going to elevate certain people and push certain people down because of chances of behavior rather than actual behavior, let's see just how rampant she claims it is. Or let's take a look at some stats here. So let's take a look at UK for an example. University of Kentucky is 58% female. Kentucky is 86.9% white, but the UK student body is only 73.7% white. Grad students even lower at 66% white. According to the University of Kentucky's own demographics, as for LGBTQ in 2023, according to BMC Public Health, 20% of college students identified as LGBTQ, and when you head out into the standard world population in America, it's only 7.2%. So this place that is just rampant with racism, sexism, and hate for the LGBTQ people, according to Representative Bojanowski here, has minorities heading to it at a higher rate than white people, women heading there at a higher rate than men, and LGBTQ people attending at much higher rates than the general population, overshowing themselves. Well, geez. Oh, Pete. If this racism and sexism and all these things are just so rampant and awful on these college universities and campuses, then why are these people, these quote-unquote protected classes, running to these places so headlong? Such a horrible place that the universities where white straight males are underrepresented, according to statistics. If you're worried about representation in the college and university side of things, if you actually want to get into the facts and numbers, white straight males are the number one group who's underrepresented in our colleges and universities. When you're just looking at percentages. Because they say, well, obviously minorities are not the majority, so they can't be the majority at the university. So the idea is they should at least be the percentage they represent in the population. Well, they're more than the percentage they represent in population. Same with women. So obviously white men and straight white men are not at universities at the same rate as they're occurring in the general public. So it's not really about people representing themselves properly. And we know just with common sense what Bojanowski said is clearly and crazily false. These are not hotbeds for discrimination and awfulness, unless, of course, you're a conservative on campus. And, well, you don't need to search far to find evidence of how awful the conservatives are being treated on campus, on college campuses. We have examples of Riley Gaines being held hostage in a room. We have Ben Shapiro and Matt Walsh and Charlie Kirk and all these people, all these conservative talkers having to spend tens of thousands of dollars on private security to talk on college campuses. When's the last time we've heard of a leftist having to do that? Then we have this. We have Representative Kulkarni here going off into la-la land where this bill is completely different than it is. Here's what she has to say. Let's take a listen here.
Violent oppression, racism, and segregation led to a revolution of freedom and sovereignty that was initiated and perpetuated by a gentleman named Mohandas Gandhi, whose implementation of determined but nonviolent resistance is called satyagraha, which is adherence to the truth. These concepts were also utilized to fight against a system of government-sanctioned and perfectly legal violent oppression, racism, and segregation in this country, which led to a revolution for freedom and equity by the Reverend Martin Luther King, Jr. This bill would disallow the teaching of the systems that led these individuals to act.
So the bill does literally nothing of the sort. The bill simply says, one, you're still allowed to teach all those concepts. You just can't require them. And if they are required, well, then they just can't be presented as fact. They have to be something of debating. Karl Marx was motivated by the idea that the working class was being put upon by the rich and that, racism and minorities were being put upon the oppressors versus oppressed and blah, 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 blah. You can still teach that. If you present those ideas as facts, that's what the bill isn't allowing. But this is the la-la land they live in, where the bill disallows teaching when it doesn't do anything. You're allowed to teach exactly what you teach now. You just have to allow discussion on it if it's at all something that is up for discussion. You can't present it as fact when it's your opinion. Colleges and universities are not hotbeds of racism and attacks on women and LGBTQ people and everything else. These are the worlds they live in, a world that dictates to them it's just so awful they must put in place their own racism. Well, y'all, that's what we have time for today on the Andrew Cooperrider Show. I thank you all so much for joining me. We'll be back here tomorrow at 9 a.m. on WZXI, 1 o'clock everywhere else. Well, if you want to reach out to the show, head on over to theandrewshow.com. Otherwise, we'll see you tomorrow.